I was trapped outside my own home as flames licked the sky like cruel fingers, all because my own daughter slammed the door and turned the lock on me. The choking smoke filled the air, and I remember thinking, this is how it ends. My own flesh and blood chose to save herself and leave me to burn. Today, I'm going to tell you something I never thought I would share. And if for even a second this feels familiar, I only ask that you like this video and subscribe. It will help me keep opening my heart. My name is Margaret, and at 73 years old, I thought I understood what family meant. I thought sacrifice and unconditional love would be rewarded with gratitude, maybe even a little respect. I was wrong. Living in a cramped brownstone in Brooklyn, New York, my days had become a grueling cycle of empty meals, cold silences, and waiting for someone, anyone, to notice I was slowly fading away like an old photograph left in the sun. That October evening, the wind cut through my thin cardigan as I climbed the familiar steps to what I still foolishly called home. My arthritic hands trembled not just from the cold, but from exhaustion. I had spent the entire day at the grocery store, using my Social Security check to buy food for Olivia and her 2 teenagers, just like I did every month. The paper bags rustled against my hip as I fumbled for my keys, only to realize I had left them inside again. My memory wasn't what it used to be. I knocked softly on the front door, expecting my daughter Olivia to open it with her usual tired but familiar expression. Maybe she would roll her eyes at my forgetfulness, but she would let me in. She always did. Instead, I heard her voice through the thick wood, sharp and impatient. "Mom, I'm busy right now. Can you wait outside for a few minutes?" The October wind picked up, and I pulled my cardigan tighter around my shoulders. "Olivia, honey, I'm cold. I just need to put the groceries away and grab my keys." Silence. I knocked again, harder this time. My knuckles ached from the cold. "Olivia, please. I bought that organic pasta you like, and the ice cream is melting." That's when I heard it. The deliberate turn of the deadbolt. The sound echoed in my chest like a gunshot. She had locked me out. My own daughter had locked me out of the house I had been paying rent on for the past 3 years. The first wave of disbelief crashed against me like ice water. I stood there, grocery bags cutting into my palms, staring at the peeling green paint of the door that suddenly felt like a wall between me and everything I thought I knew about love. Old photographs lined the hallway inside, I knew. I had hung them myself just last Christmas. Olivia at her high school graduation, me holding her on her first birthday, family dinners around the small kitchen table when she was young and still called me mommy. The smell of her favorite chocolate chip cookies I used to bake every Sunday still seemed to drift through my memory, mixing with the harsh October air that now burned my lungs. I had expected warmth. A tired smile. Maybe even a thank you for the groceries. The reality was this locked door, this cold concrete stoop, this growing realization that I was nothing more than an ATM with a heartbeat. But that was just the beginning. What happened next would change everything. I want to take you back, to help you understand how I ended up standing outside in the cold, bags of groceries at my feet, while my daughter pretended I didn't exist. Because this locked door wasn't really about keys or timing. It was the culmination of decades of sacrifices that had slowly hollowed me out, leaving behind a woman I barely recognized. 45 years ago, I was 28 years old, standing in this same Brooklyn neighborhood, but everything was different then. I was different then. I had dreams that stretched beyond these narrow streets, plans that didn't involve working myself to death just to keep food on someone else's table. I wanted to be a teacher. I had even started taking education courses at Brooklyn College, studying late into the night after my shifts at the diner, imagining myself in a classroom full of bright, eager faces. Then Richard left. He didn't leave gradually, the way some marriages crumble over years of small disappointments. He left like a tornado, sudden and destructive, taking my security and my future with him. One morning I woke up to find a note on the kitchen counter, written in his careful handwriting on the back of an electric bill. "Margaret, I can't do this anymore. I'm going to California. Don't try to find me." Olivia was only 3 years old then, still small enough to curl up in my lap during afternoon naps, still young enough to believe that Daddy would come back from his very long work trip. I remember the exact moment I realized I was truly alone, sitting on the edge of our bed, holding that note, while Olivia played with her stuffed elephant in the next room. The weight of complete responsibility settled on my shoulders like a lead blanket. I gave up the education courses first. Then I gave up the small apartment we couldn't afford on just my diner wages. We moved in with my sister Clara for 6 months, until her husband made it clear we had worn out our welcome. Then came the years of tiny studio apartments, working double shifts, leaving Olivia with whoever would watch her for a few dollars. I cleaned offices at night after the diner closed. I walked miles to save bus fare. I bought day-old bread and marked down produce, making sure Olivia never knew we were poor. When she wanted a bicycle for her 8th birthday, I worked Christmas Day and New Year's Eve to afford it. When she needed new shoes for school, I wore my old ones with cardboard covering the holes in the soles. "Mom, can you lend me some money again?" became Olivia's most frequent phone call as she got older. The request started small when she was in college. $20 for textbooks. $50 for a security deposit. But they grew larger and more frequent as the years passed. By the time she was 30, she was asking for hundreds, sometimes thousands. "I have my own bills, Olivia," I would say, my voice getting smaller each time. "Maybe you could try to budget better, or pick up some extra shifts." Her response was always the same sharp tone, cutting through the phone like broken glass. "Mom, if you can't help your own daughter, who can you help?" I wouldn't ask if I wasn't desperate. The guilt would wash over me immediately. What kind of mother says no to her child in need? So I would transfer the money, even if it meant I ate peanut butter sandwiches for dinner the rest of the month. Even if it meant I couldn't afford my arthritis medication. Even if it meant I worked extra hours when my back was screaming in pain. But the worst part wasn't the money. It was the silence that followed. After I transferred the funds, Olivia would disappear. No thank you calls. No checking to see how I was doing. Sometimes weeks would pass before I heard from her again, and it was always because she needed something else. "I told you, I'm not an ATM." I finally snapped one afternoon, after she had called asking for $800 for car repairs, just 2 weeks after I had sent her $500 for her electric bill. My throat was sore from trying to explain my own financial struggles, from trying to make her understand that my Social Security check only stretched so far. The line went quiet for a long moment. Then Olivia's voice came back, cold and sharp as winter wind. "Fine, Mom. I'll remember that the next time you want to see your grandchildren." She hung up, leaving me holding the phone, listening to the dial tone, feeling like someone had just punched me in the stomach. The threat was clear. Access to Tyler and Emma, my teenage grandchildren, was contingent on my willingness to open my wallet. The love I thought was unconditional had a price tag attached. That call marked the beginning of a new kind of silence. Not just the absence of thank you calls, but the presence of something much more painful. Silent punishment. When I couldn't afford to send money, the invitations stopped coming. When I tried to call just to chat, her responses became shorter and shorter until she stopped answering altogether. I began to question everything. Was I being unreasonable? Was I selfish for wanting to keep some of my own money for my own needs? Was I imagining the pattern, or was I truly just a convenience to her? A provider of last resort when her other options ran out? The doubt ate at me like acid. I would lie awake at night, staring at the ceiling of my small studio apartment, wondering if I had failed as a mother. Wondering if all those years of sacrifice had somehow spoiled the very person I was trying to protect and provide for. But it wasn't just about money. That was just the most obvious symptom of something much deeper and more painful. It was about respect. About being seen as a human being with my own needs and limitations, not just as a resource to be tapped when convenient. Do you know what it feels like to slowly realize that your own child sees you as nothing more than an obligation? A burden to be managed rather than a person to be cherished? I think you might. I think that's why you're listening to my story. The microaggressions started so small I almost didn't notice them at first. They crept into our relationship like weeds in a garden, choking out the flowers so gradually that by the time I realized what was happening, they had taken over everything. My 70th birthday came and went without so much as a phone call. I spent the entire day sitting by my telephone, checking to make sure it was working, telling myself that Olivia was probably just busy and would call later. She never did. When I finally called her 3 days later, her response was casual, almost dismissive. "Oh, was that this week? Sorry, Mom, things have been crazy with the kids' school schedule." My birthday wasn't on some random day that might slip someone's mind. It was October 15th, the same date it had been for 70 years. The same date we had celebrated together for her entire life. But apparently, it wasn't important enough to mark on her calendar anymore. When I fractured my wrist falling down the stairs outside my apartment building, I called Olivia from the emergency room. I was scared, sitting alone in that cold hospital room, my arm throbbing with pain, needing someone to care that I was hurt. She came, eventually. 3 hours later, she rushed into the emergency room with her phone pressed to her ear, finishing some work call while I sat there with my arm in a temporary sling. "How bad is it?" she asked, not looking up from her phone screen. "They think it's broken," I said, trying to keep the hurt out of my voice. "The doctor wants to do x-rays." "Okay, well, let me know when you're done. I have to pick up Emma from soccer practice at 5. She spent the next 2 hours in that uncomfortable plastic chair beside my bed, but her attention was everywhere except on me. Text messages, emails, phone calls, social media. I watched her scroll through Facebook while the nurse explained my discharge instructions. I watched her check Instagram while the doctor told me about physical therapy and recovery time. I may have been the one with the broken bone, but I felt invisible. That pattern repeated itself over and over. When I had a bad flu that kept me in bed for a week, Olivia's response to my phone call was, "Can you call back later? I'm in the middle of something." When my neighbor Rosa had to drive me to the grocery store because I was too weak to walk, Olivia's comment was, "Maybe you should consider moving to one of those senior communities where they take care of everything for you." She wasn't suggesting it out of concern for my well-being. She was suggesting it because my needs had become inconvenient for her. But the shocking discovery that finally broke through my decades of denial came on a gray Thursday in March. I was organizing my small desk, trying to file away medical bills and bank statements, when I found something that made my blood turn to ice water in my veins. A credit report with my name on it, showing accounts I had never opened. A car loan for $15,000 that I definitely hadn't applied for. Credit card debt on cards I had never seen. My identity, my good credit that I had spent a lifetime building and protecting, had been stolen. And the address on all the accounts was Olivia's house. My own daughter had been using my identity to finance her lifestyle, and I was just now discovering it. The papers scattered from my shaking hands like autumn leaves. I sat there in my small kitchen, staring at the evidence of a betrayal so deep I couldn't quite process it. It wasn't just money this time. It was theft. It was fraud. It was the complete and utter destruction of any trust one had left. But more than that, it was the final proof that I wasn't a mother to her. I was a mark. A victim. The coffee cup I was holding slipped from my numb fingers and shattered against the linoleum floor. The sound echoed through my tiny apartment like a gunshot, and suddenly I was crying. Not the gentle tears of sadness, but the ugly, desperate sobs of someone whose world has just collapsed. I sat there on my kitchen floor, surrounded by broken porcelain and my own shattered illusions, finally understanding that the daughter I had raised, sacrificed for, and loved unconditionally for 45 years saw me as nothing more than a resource to be exploited. That night, I did something I hadn't done in months. I looked at myself in the bathroom mirror, really looked. The woman staring back at me was almost unrecognizable. When had my cheeks become so hollow? When had my eyes become so empty? When had I become this ghost of a person, fading away in my own life? I dragged out the old photo albums from under my bed, the ones I looked at when I was feeling especially lonely. Pictures of Olivia as a baby, as a child, as a teenager. Pictures of family vacations we couldn't afford but I had managed anyway. Pictures of birthdays and Christmas mornings and all the moments I thought we were building something beautiful together. One by one, I packed them away in cardboard boxes. Not because I didn't want to remember, but because the memories hurt too much to look at. The little girl in those photos loved me. The woman who had stolen my identity saw me as a mark. As I folded the last photo into the box, a terrifying thought entered my mind for the first time in my life. What if I said no? What if I stopped sending money? What if I stopped bailing her out of every financial crisis? What if I started living for myself instead of constantly sacrificing for someone who clearly didn't appreciate the sacrifice? The idea was simultaneously liberating and terrifying. Because saying no to Olivia meant risking the complete loss of my family. It meant potentially never seeing Tyler and Emma again. It meant accepting that I might spend my remaining years truly alone. But as I sat there surrounded by boxes of memories, I realized something important. I was already alone. I had been alone for years, I just hadn't admitted it to myself. The only difference would be that I would stop pretending otherwise. The fear of loneliness had kept me trapped in a cycle of abuse for decades. The need to be needed had made me an enabler of my own destruction. And the desperate hope that unconditional love would eventually be returned had blinded me to the reality that some people are incapable of returning love at all. That night, I made a decision. I was going to take back my life, even if it meant losing everything I thought I wanted to keep. But I had no idea how hard that decision would be to follow through on. When I confronted Olivia about the identity theft, I expected shock. Maybe denial. Perhaps even an apology and a promise to make things right. What I got instead was something I should have anticipated but somehow didn't see coming. Gaslighting. "Mom, what are you talking about?" Her voice carried that tone she had perfected over the years, the one that made me feel like I was being unreasonable just for asking questions. "You probably applied for those things and forgot. Your memory hasn't been great lately." "Olivia, I didn't apply for a car loan. I don't even have a driver's license anymore." "Well, maybe someone stole your identity. That happens all the time to elderly people. You should be more careful with your personal information." The casual way she deflected responsibility, the way she turned it back on me, made my stomach clench with recognition. This wasn't surprise. This wasn't confusion. This was the response of someone who had been caught and was trying to manipulate her way out of consequences. The address on all these accounts is your house, Olivia. A long pause. Then, you're imagining things, Mom. Why can't you just be grateful that I'm still here? After Dad left, after everyone else gave up on you, I'm the one who stayed. I'm the one who takes care of you. Takes care of me. The irony was so thick I could taste it. Taking care of me by stealing my identity? I never stole anything from you. Her voice was rising now, taking on that edge that meant she was about to say something cruel. Everything I've ever done has been because you can't take care of yourself. Someone has to manage your finances because you're obviously not capable of it. And there it was. The truth, wrapped in justification. She had taken control of my financial identity without my consent, and she was framing it as a favor to me. I want you to close those accounts immediately, I said, my voice steadier than I felt. And I want to see documentation that they've been closed. Fine, Mom. But don't come crying to me when you can't afford your rent next month because you're too proud to let your family help you. Help. She called identity theft help. My son Jeremy's response was different but equally painful. When I called to tell him what had happened, hoping for support or at least understanding, he sighed heavily into the phone. Mom, can't you just work this out between yourselves? I don't want to get in the middle of you and Olivia. Jeremy, she stole my identity. This isn't a family squabble. This is fraud. Look, I'm sure there's a reasonable explanation. Olivia wouldn't do something like that maliciously. Maybe she was trying to help and just went about it the wrong way. The wrong way. As if there was a right way to steal someone's identity. So you think it's okay that she opened credit accounts in my name without telling me? Another sigh. I think you two need to talk and figure this out. I have enough drama in my own life right now. Jeremy had always been conflict averse. Even as a child, he would leave the room when Olivia and I argued. Now, as an adult living in Seattle with his own family, he had perfected the art of staying neutral to the point of being useless. His refusal to take a side felt like taking Olivia's side by default. But it was the reaction of my grandchildren that cut the deepest. Tyler was 15, old enough to understand what was happening but young enough to be completely controlled by his mother's narrative. When I tried to call him to maintain some connection, his responses were short and obviously coached. I'm not supposed to talk to you right now, Grandma. Mom says you're going through some stuff. Going through some stuff. As if discovering that my daughter had committed fraud in my name was just a phase I was going through, like menopause or a midlife crisis. Emma, at 13, was even more direct. Mom says you're saying mean things about our family. Why are you being so dramatic? Dramatic? I was being dramatic by objecting to identity theft. The isolation was swift and complete. Within a week of confronting Olivia about the credit accounts, I went from having a family that occasionally disappointed me to having no family at all. The silence was different from the previous neglect. This wasn't indifference. This was punishment. But in that darkness, a small light appeared in the most unexpected place. Rosa Martinez lived in the apartment next to mine, and we had been nodding neighbors for 3 years without ever really talking. She was a few years younger than me, maybe 65, with steel gray hair she wore in a neat bun and the kind of warm brown eyes that seemed to see everything. Her apartment always smelled like fresh coffee and the spices she used in her traditional Puerto Rican cooking. The day I found out about the identity theft, I was crying on the steps outside our building, holding the credit report in my shaking hands. Rosa came home from her job at the community center and sat down beside me without saying a word. She didn't ask what was wrong. She didn't offer empty platitudes. She just sat there, a quiet presence in my storm. After a few minutes, she spoke in her gentle voice, flavored with just a hint of her original accent. My daughter, she stole money from me too. Different situation, but same feeling in the heart. I looked up at her, surprised. Rosa had always seemed so put together, so confident. Her daughter visited regularly, brought the grandchildren around. They seemed like the perfect family. She took $8,000 from my savings account when I was in the hospital with pneumonia 2 years ago. Had me sign papers she said were for insurance, but they were bank withdrawal slips. By the time I figured it out, the money was gone. What did you do? First, I cried for about a week. Then I got angry for another week. Then I decided I wasn't going to let her destroy the rest of my life. She stood up and brushed dust off her jeans. Come upstairs. I'll make us some coffee, and we can talk about what comes next. That evening, sitting in Rosa's warm kitchen, surrounded by family photos and the smell of fresh pastels she was preparing for Sunday dinner, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. I felt seen. Not as a resource or a burden or a problem to be solved. Just as a person worthy of kindness. The hardest part, Rosa said as she poured thick, strong coffee into hand-painted mugs, is admitting that our children are capable of hurting us. We spend so many years protecting them, we forget to protect ourselves from them. She was right. I had been so focused on being the perfect mother, the endlessly forgiving mother, the always available mother, that I had never considered the possibility that my own child might become my abuser. That night, for the first time in months, I slept peacefully. Not because my problems were solved, but because I finally felt like I wasn't carrying them alone. Rosa became my anchor in the storm that followed. She listened without judgment when I needed to vent. She offered practical advice when I was ready to hear it. And most importantly, she reminded me that I was a person with value beyond what I could provide to others. "You know what your problem is, Margaret," she said one afternoon as we sat on the building's front steps, watching the neighborhood kids play in the small park across the street. "You think love means never saying no. But real love sometimes requires saying no. Real love sets boundaries." I had never thought of boundaries as an act of love before. I had always thought they were selfish, a way of protecting yourself at the expense of others. But Rosa helped me understand that healthy boundaries protect relationships, not harm them. When you enable someone's bad behavior, you're not helping them. You're making it easier for them to stay sick. Sometimes the most loving thing you can do is stop participating in someone else's destruction. Her words echoed in my mind as I made the most difficult decision of my life. I was going to cut off all financial support to Olivia, immediately and completely. The first time I refused to send money, my hands were shaking so badly I could barely hold the phone. It was a Tuesday morning in April, and Olivia was calling with her usual crisis. The electricity was going to be shut off if she couldn't pay the bill by Friday. It was only $300. Surely I could help my own daughter keep the lights on for her children. In the past, I would have already been reaching for my checkbook before she finished explaining the situation. This time, I took a deep breath and said the words I had practiced with Rosa the night before. "I'm sorry, Olivia, but I can't help you with that." Silence. "Then, what do you mean you can't help? It's $300, Mom. You waste more than that on stupid stuff every month. I'm not going to send money anymore. You're going to have to figure out another solution." "Are you kidding me right now? My kids are going to be sitting in the dark because you want to be selfish." The guilt hit me like a physical punch. Images of Tyler and Emma sitting in a dark house flashed through my mind. But I forced myself to remember Rosa's words. Enabling bad behavior isn't helping anyone. "I'm sure you'll find another way to handle it. You're resourceful." Unbelievable. This is what I get for taking care of you all these years. "Fine, Mom. Don't come crying to me when you need something." She hung up, and I sat there holding the phone, my heart pounding like I had just run a marathon. But underneath the guilt and fear, I felt something unexpected. Relief. For the first time in decades, I had said no to my daughter's financial demands. And I was still alive. The world hadn't ended. The guilt was overwhelming, but I was still breathing. That first day of freedom felt revolutionary in ways I couldn't have anticipated. I made breakfast for myself, just for myself, without calculating whether I could afford to eat lunch later. I took a hot shower without worrying about the electric bill. I walked to the small bodega on the corner and bought myself a magazine, something I hadn't done in years because every spare dollar went to Olivia's latest crisis. The quiet in my apartment felt different. Instead of the oppressive silence of loneliness, it felt peaceful. For the first time in years, my phone wasn't buzzing with demands or guilt trips. I wasn't waiting for the next crisis call. I wasn't calculating how to stretch my social security to cover someone else's poor financial decisions. That night, I slept better than I had in months. Without the knots of anxiety tightening my chest, without the constant mental gymnastics of figuring out how to help Olivia while still paying my own bills, my body finally relaxed. But the real test was still coming. The next morning, Rosa knocked on my door with a thermos of fresh coffee and a piece of paper in her hand. "I have the name of a legal aid attorney," she said, settling into my small armchair. "She specializes in helping seniors who have been financially abused by family members. I think you should call her." Financial abuse. I had never thought of what Olivia was doing to me in those terms, but that's exactly what it was. The identity theft, the constant demands for money, the emotional manipulation, it all added up to a pattern of financial abuse that had been going on for years. Making that phone call to Legal Aid of Brooklyn was terrifying. I had to explain to a stranger that my own daughter had been stealing from me, that I needed help protecting myself from my own family. The shame burned in my throat as I spoke, but the attorney, Linda Washington, was kind and matter-of-fact. "Mrs. Patterson, you'd be surprised how often we see cases like this. Family financial abuse is much more common than people realize, especially when it involves elderly parents. The good news is that there are legal protections available to you. Within a week, I had been to 3 appointments. A bankruptcy attorney to deal with the debt Olivia had incurred in my name. A social worker to help me understand my rights and options. And finally, to the bank to open a new account that Olivia would have no access to. That trip to the small branch on Atlantic Avenue wasn't just bureaucratic paperwork. It was a crystallization of hope. For the first time in years, I was taking active steps to protect myself instead of just enduring whatever was being done to me. The young bank teller, probably not much older than Tyler, was polite and professional as she helped me set up the account. But when she handed me the temporary debit card with my name on it, I felt something profound shift inside me. This was mine. My money, in my account, protected by my password, accessible only to me. It was a small thing, but it represented something enormous, my autonomy. Walking home from the bank that afternoon, I felt different. My spine was a little straighter. My steps were a little more confident. I was still the same 73-year-old woman who had been getting steamrolled by her own family for decades, but something fundamental had changed. I was no longer a victim waiting for someone else to rescue me. I was a person taking action to save herself. But Olivia wasn't going to let her primary source of income disappear without a fight. The family meeting was unavoidable. Olivia demanded it, and Jeremy reluctantly agreed to fly in from Seattle, probably hoping to mediate between us and get back to his comfortable neutrality as quickly as possible. They wanted to meet at Olivia's house in Queens, but I insisted on neutral ground. We settled on a small diner near my apartment, the kind of place with chipped formica tables and coffee that had been sitting in the pot too long. I arrived early, sitting in a corner booth where I could see the door, my hands wrapped around a mug of coffee I was too nervous to drink. When they walked in together, Olivia and Jeremy, I was struck by how much they looked like their father. The same sharp jawline, the same way of carrying themselves that suggested they were doing you a favor just by showing up. Olivia slid into the booth across from me with the exaggerated sigh of someone who was being deeply put upon. Jeremy took the seat beside her, already looking like he wanted to be anywhere else. Okay, Mom, Olivia began without preamble. Let's talk about this ridiculous phase you're going through. Phase. As if standing up for myself was something I would grow out of, like a teenager's rebellious stage. I'm not going through a phase, Olivia. I'm protecting myself from being financially abused. She rolled her eyes dramatically. Financially abused. Jesus, Mom, you've been watching too many of those victim shows on TV. I'm your daughter, not some stranger trying to scam you. You opened credit accounts in my name without my permission. That's identity theft. I was trying to help you build your credit score. Everything I did was for your benefit. The gaslighting was so smooth, so practiced, that for a moment I almost doubted my own memory. Almost. But I had spent weeks with Rosa and Linda the attorney, learning to recognize manipulation tactics. I wasn't going to let myself be convinced that black was white anymore. If you were trying to help me, why didn't you ask my permission first? Because you would have said no. You're too paranoid about money to make good financial decisions. Too paranoid. Because protecting my credit and wanting to control my own finances was paranoia. Jeremy finally spoke up, his voice carrying that diplomatic tone that meant he was trying to make peace without actually taking a position. Mom, maybe there's been some miscommunication here. I'm sure Olivia didn't mean to, don't. I held up my hand to stop him. Don't minimize this, Jeremy. Don't make excuses for her. And don't pretend this is about miscommunication. He looked genuinely surprised. I had never cut him off before, had never spoken to him with anything approaching firmness. I loved you both more than my own life, I continued, my voice steady despite the emotions churning in my chest. I sacrificed everything for you. My education, my career, my financial security, my health. I worked myself into the ground to make sure you had everything you needed and most of what you wanted. Olivia opened her mouth to interrupt, but I kept talking. And in return, you've treated me like a bank account with a heartbeat. You only call when you need money. You ignore my birthdays. You use my identity to finance your lifestyle. You threaten to keep my grandchildren away from me if I don't comply with your financial demands. That's not, Olivia started. I'm not finished. The firmness in my own voice surprised me. I have enabled this behavior for years because I was afraid of losing you. But I realize now that I lost you a long time ago. The daughter who loved me became someone who sees me as a resource to be exploited. And I won't participate in that anymore. I reached into my purse and pulled out the old family photo I had brought, the one from our trip to Coney Island when the kids were young. We all looked so happy in that picture, arms around each other, genuine smiles, sun-kissed and carefree. Olivia's eyes lit up when she saw it. "Oh, Mom, I remember this day. We had so much fun on the boardwalk, and you bought us those huge ice cream cones." I tore the photograph in half. The sound of ripping paper was shockingly loud in the quiet diner. Olivia's face went white, then red with fury. "What the hell is wrong with you?" I folded the torn pieces carefully and placed them in a small envelope I had brought for this purpose. Then I sealed the envelope and put it in my purse. Nothing is wrong with me. For the first time in years, everything is right with me. I looked directly into her eyes, my voice calm and clear. "I will no longer buy love. I will no longer enable your irresponsibility. I will no longer allow you to abuse me financially or emotionally." I stood up from the table, leaving money for my coffee on the chipped formica. "Respect me or lose me. Those are your options." And I walked out of that diner, leaving my adult children sitting there in stunned silence. Walking home through the familiar Brooklyn streets, I felt something I hadn't experienced in decades. Power. Not power over anyone else, but power over my own life. The ability to make choices based on my own well-being rather than someone else's manipulation. The autumn air was crisp and clean in my lungs. The late afternoon sun painted the brownstones in golden light. And for the first time in years, I was walking toward my own life instead of limping away from everyone else's expectations. But Olivia wasn't done with me yet. I thought the worst was over. I thought that after the confrontation at the diner, after I had made my boundaries crystal clear, we could all move forward. Maybe we wouldn't have the close relationship I had always dreamed of, but at least we would have honesty. I was naive. 3 weeks after our meeting, Jeremy called me from Seattle. His voice carried an edge I had never heard before, coldly professional, like he was conducting unpleasant business rather than talking to his mother. "Mom, we need to talk about what you've been saying about Olivia." "What do you mean?" "She's very upset about the accusations you've been making. About the identity theft and the financial abuse. She says you've been telling people she's a criminal." I felt a chill run down my spine. "Jeremy, I haven't been talking to people about family business. The only person I've discussed this with is my attorney and Rosa next door." "Well, someone has been spreading stories, because Olivia's friends are asking her about it. Her boss pulled her aside at work to ask if everything was okay at home. This is affecting her reputation." The victim was becoming the perpetrator, in typical fashion. Olivia was turning my legitimate complaints about her behavior into an attack on her character. "I'm not spreading stories, Jeremy. I'm protecting myself from fraud. If Olivia's reputation is being affected, maybe she should stop committing fraud." A long pause. "Then, Mom, I think you need to get some help. Maybe talk to someone about these paranoid thoughts you've been having." Paranoid thoughts. My own son was suggesting I was mentally unstable because I had objected to being stolen from. "I'm not paranoid, Jeremy. I have police reports and legal documents proving everything I've said. Look, I don't want to argue with you. I just think you should consider getting some kind of professional help. Grief counseling or something. Sometimes people your age develop trust issues or become suspicious of their families for no real reason. People my age. As if being 73 automatically made me incapable of rational thought. That phone call should have prepared me for what came next, but nothing could have prepared me for the cruelty of what Olivia did in response to my standing up for myself. The Facebook post appeared on a Thursday morning in November. Rosa showed it to me on her tablet, her face grave with concern. "Margaret, I think you need to see this. But prepare yourself, honey. It's bad." The post was long, written in Olivia's careful prose, designed to sound reasonable and concerned rather than vindictive. The headline alone made my stomach drop. "When your aging parent becomes delusional, a plea for understanding. It breaks my heart to write this, but I need to share what my family has been going through lately. My 73-year-old mother has been exhibiting increasingly erratic and paranoid behavior over the past few months. She has accused me of stealing her identity and financially abusing her, despite all evidence to the contrary. She has cut off all contact with her grandchildren, claiming that I am using them to manipulate her. She has been telling neighbors and acquaintances that I am a criminal who has been taking advantage of her for years." The post continued for several paragraphs, painting a picture of me as a confused elderly woman who had become irrationally suspicious of the daughter who was trying to care for her. She described my sudden personality change and my increasing isolation and hostility. She even mentioned my meeting with the attorney, framing it as evidence of my desperate need for validation of her paranoid fantasies. The post ended with a request for advice and support. Has anyone else dealt with a parent who has developed these kinds of trust issues and delusions? How do you help someone who has become convinced that their own family is out to get them? I love my mother dearly, but I don't know how to reach her anymore. Any advice would be appreciated. The comments section was full of sympathy and support for Olivia. Friends and acquaintances offering advice about dealing with difficult elderly parents. Suggestions for memory care facilities and geriatric psychiatrists. Words like dementia and paranoia and elderly abuse of the system scattered throughout the responses like knives. I sat in Rosa's kitchen, staring at the tablet screen, feeling like someone had just punched me in the chest. In one carefully crafted social media post, Olivia had destroyed my reputation and painted herself as the long-suffering daughter of a mentally unstable mother. The genius of it was how reasonable it sounded. She didn't rant or rave or make wild accusations. She expressed concern and sadness. She asked for help and support. She made herself the victim of my deteriorating mental state, while making me look like a paranoid old woman who had turned on her loving family for no reason. "It's a lie," I whispered, my voice barely audible. "Everything she wrote is a lie." Rosa reached across the table and took my hands in hers. "I know it is, honey. Anyone who knows you knows it's a lie. But most people don't know you. They only know what she's telling them." The cruelty of it took my breath away. This wasn't just an attempt to discredit my accusations about the identity theft. This was a systematic destruction of my credibility, my reputation, and my mental competence. If anyone questioned Olivia's behavior in the future, they would remember this post. They would think of me as the delusional elderly mother who had falsely accused her devoted daughter. "What do I do?" I asked Rosa, my voice shaking with exhaustion. "Nothing," she said firmly. "You do nothing." "Nothing?" "She just destroyed my reputation in front of hundreds of people. And if you respond, you'll look exactly like the unstable, paranoid person she's describing. If you defend yourself, you'll confirm everything she just said about you." Rosa was right, and I knew it. There was no winning this battle in the court of public opinion. Anything I said in my own defense would be twisted to support Olivia's narrative. My silence would be interpreted as guilt, but my words would be used as evidence of my deteriorating mental state. I had never felt so powerless in my entire life. But Rosa wasn't finished. "The people who matter, who really know you, won't believe this garbage. And the people who do believe it without questioning? They don't matter. Your job right now is to protect your peace and stay focused on your own healing." That night, I lay awake staring at the ceiling, my mind racing with imagined conversations. All the things I wanted to say in my own defense. All the evidence I wanted to present. All the years of abuse and manipulation I wanted to expose. But I stayed silent. Not because I was weak, but because I was finally strong enough to refuse to play Olivia's game. The damage was real, though. I could see it in the way my neighbors looked at me when I passed them in the hallway. I could hear it in the carefully neutral tone Rosa's friends used when they spoke to me at the community center. I could feel it in the new distance that appeared in casual relationships I had taken for granted. Olivia had successfully isolated me, discredited me, and made me look like exactly what she needed me to look like, a mentally unstable elderly woman whose accusations couldn't be trusted. But she had also done something she didn't intend. She had freed me completely from any remaining obligation to her. When you realize that someone is willing to destroy your reputation to maintain their ability to abuse you, the relationship is over. Not strained. Not damaged. Over. I was no longer trying to salvage anything. I was no longer hoping for change or redemption or the return of a daughter who had probably never really existed in the first place. I was done. And being done, finally and completely done, was the most liberating feeling I had experienced in my entire life. Winter arrived early that year, blanketing Brooklyn in snow by the first week of December. But inside my small apartment, something was blooming. For the first time in years, maybe decades, I was living for myself. I woke up on a Saturday morning in early December and realized I had slept through the night without waking up once. No anxiety dreams about family crises. No middle-of-the-night worry sessions about money or relationships or guilt. Just deep, peaceful sleep, the kind I remembered from my childhood but hadn't experienced in years. Standing in my small kitchen, making coffee just for me, I caught a glimpse of myself in the reflection of the window. And for the first time in months, I recognized the woman looking back at me. She had color in her cheeks again. Her shoulders weren't hunched with defensive anxiety. Her eyes, while tired, held something that had been missing: peace. That morning, I did something I hadn't done in years. I made a plan that had nothing to do with anyone else's needs or expectations. I was going to learn something new. The Brooklyn Community Arts Center on Court Street offered watercolor painting classes for seniors every Tuesday and Thursday morning. I had walked past the building hundreds of times over the years, always admiring the colorful artwork displayed in the windows, but never imagining I could be the kind of person who made art. Why not? What was stopping me besides my own assumption that I wasn't creative, wasn't talented, wasn't worth the time and money it would take to explore something purely for my own enjoyment. The first class was intimidating in all the ways I had expected and wonderful in ways I hadn't anticipated. The instructor, a patient woman named Carol who was probably in her 50s, handed me a set of brushes and a palette of colors that looked like possibilities. "Don't worry about making anything perfect," she said as I stared at the blank white paper with mild terror. "Just play with the colors and see what happens." Play. When was the last time I had played with anything? When was the last time I had done something with no purpose beyond my own enjoyment? My first painting was terrible. A muddy landscape that looked like a kindergartner's finger painting. But as I sat there in the warm classroom, surrounded by other people my age who were also learning and experimenting and making messes, something beautiful happened. I stopped caring about being perfect. I stopped worrying about judgment or criticism or whether I was good enough. For 2 hours, I was just Margaret, moving color around on paper, discovering that I could make something beautiful out of nothing but water and pigment and imagination. Walking home from that first class, carrying my terrible painting and my new supplies, I felt something I hadn't experienced in decades: pride in myself. Not pride in what I had sacrificed or endured or provided for others, but pride in what I had created, what I had attempted, what I had dared to try. The painting went on my refrigerator, where family photos used to hang. But the art class wasn't the only change. That winter, I started doing things I had been putting off for years. I bought new clothes, not because my old ones were worn out, but because I wanted to feel good in them. I rearranged my furniture, not to accommodate visitors who never came, but to please myself. I started cooking meals I actually liked instead of whatever was cheapest or easiest. Small changes, but they added up to something revolutionary. I was crafting a life designed around my own happiness instead of everyone else's convenience. Rosa noticed the difference immediately. "You look good, girl," she said one afternoon as we sat on the front steps of our building, watching the neighborhood kids build snowmen in the small park across the street. "You look like yourself again." Herself again. That was exactly how I felt. Like I had been wearing someone else's life for years and had finally found my own clothes in the back of the closet. "I think I forgot who I was for a while," I admitted. "I got so focused on being what everyone else needed me to be that I lost track of what I wanted to be." "It happens to women our age more than it should," Rosa said, her voice carrying the weight of her own experience. "We spend so many years taking care of everyone else, we forget we're allowed to take care of ourselves too." It was during this period of rediscovering myself that I reconnected with someone I hadn't thought about in years, my old friend Patricia from the diner where I used to work. Patricia had been my fellow waitress during those exhausting years when Olivia was small and money was tight. We had covered each other's shifts when kids got sick, shared tips when one of us was short on rent, and kept each other sane during the worst of the lunch rushes. I found her on social media, still living in Brooklyn, still working at a diner, but different diner in Park Slope. When I messaged her, she responded immediately with excitement and warmth. "Margaret, I was just thinking about you the other day. How are you? How's Olivia?" That question stopped me cold. How was Olivia? The automatic response would have been to share an update about her life, her kids, her struggles, as if my entire identity was wrapped up in being her mother. Instead, I wrote back, "I'm doing well. Learning to paint and figuring out who I am outside of motherhood. How are you?" We met for coffee the following week, and it was like stepping back into a version of myself I had almost forgotten existed. Patricia remembered me as funny, capable, resilient. She told stories about our diner days that made me laugh until my sides ached. "You were always the one covering extra shifts to help out other people," she said over her second cup of coffee. "But you were also the one who would sneak the broke customers extra food and pretend it was a kitchen mistake. You had the biggest heart of anyone I knew." Had. Past tense. As if that version of myself was gone. "I think maybe my heart got too big for my own good," I said. "I forgot to save any room in it for myself." "Well, it's never too late to fix that," Patricia said with a grin. "Want to come with me to bingo at the church on Wednesday nights? It's mostly terrible coffee and gossip, but the company's good." I hadn't played bingo since I was a child, going with my grandmother to the Catholic church in our old neighborhood. But Wednesday night found me sitting in a folding chair in the basement of St. Thomas More, dabbing numbers on paper cards and laughing at Patricia's running commentary on the other players. "See that woman in the blue sweater? She brings her own lucky dabber and sits in the same seat every week. If someone else sits there by accident, she'll practically have a nervous breakdown." It was silly and wonderful and completely unnecessary, which made it perfect. For the first time in years, I was doing something purely for fun, with no other purpose than enjoying myself in the company of people who liked me just as I was. Walking home from bingo that first Wednesday, I realized I couldn't remember the last time I had laughed that much. Deep, genuine laughter that came from real joy, not the polite chuckles I had been producing for years when I didn't want to seem ungrateful or difficult. As winter melted into spring, my new life took on a rhythm that felt sustainable and satisfying. Art class on Tuesday and Thursday mornings. Bingo on Wednesday nights. Long walks with Rosa on weekends. Regular coffee dates with Patricia. Simple pleasures that added up to contentment. But the real test of my transformation was yet to come. It was a warm afternoon in early May when my phone rang with a number I hadn't seen in months, Olivia's. My first instinct was not to answer, but curiosity got the better of me. Mom? Her voice was different. Softer. Maybe even nervous. Hello, Olivia. I wanted to call and talk to you. About everything that's happened. I think maybe we got off on the wrong foot, and I'd like to try to work things out. The old Margaret would have felt a surge of hope and relief. My daughter was reaching out. Maybe she had realized how much she had hurt me. Maybe she was ready to apologize and make things right. The new Margaret, the one who had been learning to paint and play bingo and value her own peace of mind, wasn't so easily manipulated. What did you want to talk about? I asked, my voice neutral. Well, I've been thinking about what you said at the diner. About boundaries and respect and all that. And I think maybe you had some valid points. Some valid points. Not an acknowledgement of wrongdoing. Not an apology. Just a grudging admission that I might not have been completely crazy. I appreciate you saying that, I said carefully. So I was thinking maybe we could start over. You know, put all this behind us and try to rebuild our relationship. Tyler's graduation is next month, and we'd all love to have you there. There it was. The real reason for the call. Tyler's high school graduation. A big family event where my absence would be noticed and commented on. Olivia needed me there to maintain the appearance of family unity. I'm not sure that's a good idea, I said. What do you mean? He's your grandson, Mom. He's been asking about you. The emotional manipulation was so familiar I could have written the script myself. Use the grandchildren. Make me feel guilty for missing important events. Imply that I was the one damaging family relationships by maintaining boundaries. If Tyler wants to see me, he can call me directly. He has my number. He's a teenager, Mom. You know how they are with phones and calling people. But he really misses you. More manipulation. If he really missed me, he would have found a way to reach out during the past 6 months of silence. Teenagers who want to contact their grandparents find ways to do it. Olivia, have you closed those credit accounts you opened in my name? A pause. I'm working on that. It's complicated because some of them are tied to my mortgage and car payments. I can't just close them immediately without affecting my credit score. There it was. The real truth. She had no intention of undoing the identity theft because it would inconvenience her. The accounts were still open. My credit was still being used without my permission. And she wanted to start over without addressing any of the actual harm she had caused. Then we don't have anything to talk about, I said calmly. Mom, please don't do this. I know we've had our problems, but family is family. Don't you want to be part of your grandchildren's lives? The old threats disguised as concern. The implication that I was choosing to be excluded rather than being pushed away by her behavior. I want to be part of lives where I'm respected and valued, I replied. When you're ready to offer that, we can talk. What does that even mean? I do respect you. I do value you. Why do you think I'm calling? Because you need something from me. You need me at Tyler's graduation to maintain appearances. That's not the same as wanting a relationship with me. Another pause, longer this time. When she spoke again, her voice had lost its artificial warmth and returned to the familiar edge of irritation. Fine, Mom. If you want to miss your own grandson's graduation over some petty grudge, that's your choice. But don't blame me when he asks where his grandmother was. She hung up without saying goodbye. I sat there holding the phone for a long moment, waiting for the familiar crush of guilt and regret. Waiting for the voice in my head that would tell me I was being too harsh, too unforgiving, too selfish. The voice never came. Instead, I felt something that surprised me, relief. The old dynamic was still there, still available to me if I wanted to step back into it. The manipulation, the guilt, the endless cycle of being used and discarded and called back when needed. But I didn't want it anymore. I had tasted freedom, and I couldn't go back to being a prisoner of someone else's dysfunction. That evening, Rosa and I sat on the front steps of our building, watching the neighborhood come alive with the energy of spring. Kids playing in the park, couples walking hand in hand, the sound of music drifting from open windows. Olivia called today, I told her. Rosa raised an eyebrow. Oh? How did that go? She wanted me to come to Tyler's graduation. Said she wanted to start over and rebuild our relationship. But But she hasn't closed the credit accounts. She hasn't acknowledged what she did was wrong. She just wants me to pretend none of it happened so I can play grandmother at her convenience. Rosa nodded slowly. And what did you tell her? I told her no. How does that feel? I thought about it for a moment, checking in with myself the way my therapist Linda had taught me to do. What did I feel? Sadness? Guilt? Relief? Anger? It feels like the right choice, I said finally. For the first time in my life, I'm making decisions based on what's good for me, not what other people want from me. It feels scary and sad and liberating all at the same time. That sounds about right, Rosa said with a smile. Growth is messy like that. That night, I painted. A sunset over water, with colors I mixed myself, warm and cool tones blending together in ways that seemed to capture exactly how I felt. Hopeful but realistic. Beautiful but complex. Complete in itself, not needing anything else to make it whole. When I stepped back to look at the finished painting, I realized I had created something I was genuinely proud of. Not because it was perfect, but because it was mine. It came from my imagination, my hands, my vision of beauty. I was learning to create things instead of just enduring them. Summer passed quietly and peacefully. I continued my art classes, even signing up for an advanced session that challenged me to try new techniques. I joined a book club at the library, rediscovering my love of reading and enjoying the lively discussions about everything from mystery novels to memoirs. Patricia and I started taking day trips on the weekends, exploring parts of New York I had lived near my entire life but never really seen. We rode the subway to the Museum of Natural History, walked through Central Park, spent an afternoon at the Botanical Gardens in the Bronx. I feel like I'm finally living my life instead of just surviving it, I told her as we sat by the lily pond in the Botanical Gardens, watching dragonflies skim the water. It suits you, she said. You look happier than I've seen you in years. Maybe ever. Was this happiness? This feeling of contentment, of looking forward to tomorrow instead of dreading it, of making plans based on what brought me joy instead of what was expected of me? If so, it had been so long since I had experienced it that I had almost forgotten what it felt like. But the past wasn't quite done with me yet. October arrived with the kind of crisp, clear weather that makes you grateful to be alive. I was coming home from art class on a Thursday afternoon, carrying a painting I was particularly pleased with, a street scene of our neighborhood that actually looked recognizable, when I saw them. Tyler and Emma, standing on the steps of my building. They were taller than I remembered, older looking, but unmistakably my grandchildren. Tyler had grown into his father's height and build, while Emma looked more like Olivia had at that age, all long limbs and serious eyes. They looked nervous, shifting their weight from foot to foot, whispering to each other. When they saw me approaching, they both straightened up. Grandma? Tyler's voice cracked slightly, the way teenage boys' voices do. Can we talk to you? My first instinct was to rush toward them, to wrap them in hugs and tell them how much I had missed them, how sorry I was for the months of silence. But I had learned to pause, to think before reacting emotionally. Of course, I said carefully. Would you like to come inside? My small apartment felt even smaller with 2 teenagers in it, but I made tea and put out some cookies I had baked earlier in the week. We sat around my small kitchen table, and for a few minutes, nobody spoke. Finally, Emma broke the silence. Mom said you don't want to see us anymore. She said you're mad at our whole family and don't want to be our grandmother. The words hit like a physical blow. Of course Olivia had told them that. Of course she had made herself the victim and me the villain who had abandoned my own grandchildren. That's not true, I said gently. I love you both very much. I've missed you terribly. Then why haven't you called us? Tyler asked, his voice carrying a hurt that made my heart ache. Why didn't you come to my graduation? There it was. The question I had been dreading, the one that had no good answer. How do you explain to teenagers that their mother has been financially abusing their grandmother? How do you tell them that the family dynamics they've grown up with are toxic and harmful? It's complicated, I said finally. Your mother and I have had some serious problems that we haven't been able to work out. What kind of problems? Emma pressed. She says you accused her of stealing from you, but that's crazy. Mom would never steal from anyone, especially not you. I looked at their young faces, so earnest and confused, so desperate to understand why their family had suddenly fractured. They loved their mother. She was their world, their provider, their security. How could I tell them what she really was without destroying their sense of safety? Sometimes adults have disagreements about money and boundaries, I said carefully. It's not your fault, and it's not about you. But sometimes relationships between grown-ups get damaged in ways that are hard to fix. But you're her mother, Tyler said, as if that fact alone should solve everything. Mothers and daughters are supposed to work things out. Oh, sweet boy. If only the world worked that way. I tried very hard to work things out, I said. But some problems can't be solved by one person alone. Both people have to want to fix things, and they both have to be willing to change their behavior. Mom says she's tried to apologize, but you won't forgive her, Emma said, and I could hear Olivia's words in her voice. Of course, that's what Olivia had told them. A vague apology that I had unreasonably rejected, painting herself as the peacemaker and me as the stubborn, unforgiving mother. Did your mother tell you what she was apologizing for? I asked. They looked at each other uncertainly. She said there were misunderstandings about money, Tyler said finally. Misunderstandings about money. That's how Olivia had described identity theft and financial abuse to her children. Misunderstandings. I made a decision then that I knew would be controversial, that might even be wrong. But these kids deserved some version of the truth. Your mother used my personal information to open credit accounts without my permission, I said simply. She spent money in my name without telling me. When I found out and asked her to stop, she refused. That's not a misunderstanding. That's theft. The silence that followed was deafening. I could see them processing this information, trying to reconcile it with their image of their mother as the hardworking single parent who had always provided for them. But she was probably just trying to help you, Emma said finally, her voice smaller than before. Maybe she thought she was helping. But help that happens without permission isn't help. It's control. Tyler was quiet for a long moment, staring at his hands. When he looked up, his eyes were older than they had been when he walked into my apartment. Is that why you stopped sending money? Mom said you cut off all financial support without warning. Cut off all financial support. As if I had been obligated to provide it in the first place. As if my social security check existed for their benefit rather than my own survival. I stopped sending money because I realized I was enabling your mother to avoid taking responsibility for her own financial decisions. I was making it easier for her to live beyond her means instead of helping her learn to budget and manage money properly. But what if she really needed help? Emma asked. Your mother is a capable adult with a good job. If she needs financial help, she can apply for a loan from a bank like anyone else. She shouldn't be depending on her elderly mother's social security to pay her bills. I could see them struggling with this concept. They had grown up in a household where grandma's money was just another resource to be tapped when needed. The idea that I might have my own financial limitations, my own needs and priorities, seemed foreign to them. We didn't know, Tyler said finally. We didn't know any of this was happening. I know you didn't. This is between your mother and me. It's not your responsibility to fix it or choose sides. But we miss you, Emma said, her voice breaking slightly. We miss having you in our lives. Those words nearly undid me. The urge to tell them everything would be fine, that I would forget about the identity theft and the financial abuse and the social media campaign against me, was overwhelming. These children hadn't asked to be born into a dysfunctional family. They didn't deserve to lose their grandmother because their mother was unable to have healthy adult relationships. But giving in to that urge would ultimately hurt them more than help them. It would teach them that love means accepting abuse. It would show them that family members can treat each other terribly as long as they apologize afterward. It would perpetuate the cycle of dysfunction for another generation. I miss you too, I said truthfully. More than you know. But I can't have a relationship with your mother right now because she continues to do things that hurt me, and I can't pretend that's okay. What if we visited you without telling her? Tyler suggested. What if we just came to see you sometimes on our own? The offer was tempting and heartbreaking at the same time. Secret visits with my grandchildren, stolen moments of connection hidden from their mother. But that would put them in the middle of an adult conflict, force them to lie and sneak around, make them responsible for maintaining a relationship that their mother was actively sabotaging. I don't want you to have to lie to your mother, I said. If you want to have a relationship with me, that conversation needs to happen between her and me, not between you and me. They stayed for another hour, and we talked about lighter things. School, friends, their plans for the future. Tyler was thinking about college, maybe studying engineering. Emma was interested in veterinary medicine. They were good kids, smart and thoughtful, despite the chaos of their home environment. When they finally left, promising to think about what I had said and maybe talk to Mom about working things out, I sat in my quiet apartment feeling drained but also strangely peaceful. I had told them the truth, age-appropriately and without trying to turn them against their mother. I had maintained my boundaries while also expressing my love for them. I had refused to put them in the middle of the adult conflict while also refusing to pretend that conflict didn't exist. It was the most mature I had ever been in dealing with my family, and it felt like another step forward in my recovery from decades of dysfunction. But I should have known that Olivia wouldn't let their visit go unanswered. The phone call came the next morning, early enough to wake me from a deep sleep. Olivia's voice was shaking with fury. "How dare you fill my children's heads with lies about me?" "Good morning, Olivia. What lies are you referring to?" "Tyler and Emma came home yesterday talking about identity theft and financial abuse. They're questioning everything I've ever told them about our family situation. You had no right to poison them against me." "Poison them?" "By telling them the truth." I answered their questions honestly. They asked why we weren't speaking, and I told them. "You told them I'm a thief. You told them I've been stealing from you. You made me sound like some kind of criminal to my own children. You did steal from me, Olivia. You opened credit accounts in my name without my permission. That is, by definition, theft. I was trying to help you. Everything I did was for your benefit, and you know it." The same lie, told so many times she might actually believe it herself. "If you were trying to help me, why didn't you ask permission first? Why didn't you tell me what you were doing?" "Because you would have said no. You're too paranoid and controlling about money to make good decisions." There it was again. My desire to control my own finances was paranoia and controlling behavior. My objection to having my identity stolen was unreasonable. "From now on, you stay away from my children," she continued. "If you want to destroy our family with your lies and accusations, fine. But you're not dragging Tyler and Emma into your delusions. They came to see me, Olivia. I didn't seek them out. And I'm making sure it doesn't happen again. You've caused enough damage already." She hung up, leaving me staring at the phone in my hand. So that was it, then? The final boundary. I was not to have any contact with my grandchildren. Access to them was completely contingent on my willingness to pretend that financial abuse was actually help, that theft was actually generosity, that my objections to being victimized were actually delusions. I waited for the familiar crush of guilt and panic. The desperate need to call back and apologize, to accept whatever terms Olivia set just to keep some connection to Tyler and Emma. But I was different now. I had spent months learning to recognize manipulation, learning to trust my own perceptions, learning to value my own well-being. The guilt and panic never came. Instead, I felt something unexpected: relief. The uncertainty was over. The false hope that maybe we could work things out, maybe find some middle ground, maybe rebuild some version of a healthy relationship, was gone. Olivia had made her choice clear. She would rather cut me off from my grandchildren completely than address her own behavior or respect my boundaries. And in making that choice, she had freed me completely from any remaining obligation to her or guilt about the situation. I was done trying to salvage a relationship with someone who saw me as nothing more than a resource to be exploited and discarded at will. I was done hoping for change from someone who was incapable of acknowledging wrongdoing. I was done sacrificing my peace of mind for the illusion of family connection. For the first time in my entire adult life, I was truly, completely, unequivocally done. That afternoon, I did something I had never done before. I went shopping for myself, not because I needed anything, but because I wanted to celebrate my freedom. At the small boutique on Atlantic Avenue, I bought a soft blue sweater that brought out my eyes, a pair of comfortable but stylish shoes, and a silk scarf that felt luxurious against my skin. At the bookstore, I bought 3 novels I had wanted to read, not worrying about whether they were on sale or whether I could afford them. At the art supply store, I bought a set of professional quality brushes and a selection of colors I had been wanting to try. Walking home with my arms full of packages, I felt something I hadn't experienced since I was a young woman: the simple joy of spending money on things that made me happy. That evening, Rosa and I sat in my kitchen, drinking wine and admiring my new purchases. "You look different," she said, studying my face in the warm light of my table lamp. "You look lighter." Lighter. That was exactly how I felt. As if I had been carrying a heavy weight for so long I had forgotten what it felt like to stand up straight, and now the weight was gone. "I think I finally understand something," I told her. "All these years, I thought love meant never saying no. I thought being a good mother meant constantly sacrificing myself for my children's wants and needs. I thought family loyalty meant accepting abuse as long as it came from people related to me." I took a sip of wine and continued. "But I was wrong about all of it. Real love includes boundaries. Good parenting sometimes means allowing your adult children to face consequences for their actions. And family loyalty should go both ways, they should be loyal to me too." Rosa raised her glass. "Here's to figuring that out while you still have time to enjoy it." We clinked glasses, and I felt something I hadn't felt in decades: excitement about the future. Not anxiety about what crisis might happen next, not dread about the next financial demand, not guilt about whether I was doing enough for everyone else. Pure, simple excitement about the possibilities that lay ahead in a life designed around my own happiness and well-being. The months that followed were the most peaceful I had experienced since I was a young woman. Without the constant drama of Olivia's crises, without the emotional weight of trying to manage an unmanageable relationship, without the financial strain of supporting someone else's irresponsible choices, my life became spacious in ways I had forgotten were possible. I enrolled in an intermediate watercolor class and discovered I had a particular talent for painting flowers. My instructor, Carol, encouraged me to enter a piece in the community art show, something I never would have considered doing a year earlier. The painting I chose was a bouquet of sunflowers, bright and cheerful and completely unlike the dark, heavy emotions that had dominated my life for so many years. When it sold on the first day of the show for more money than I had expected, I felt a pride that had nothing to do with anyone else's approval or gratitude. I had created something beautiful, something valuable, something that brought joy to someone else's life. And I had done it entirely for myself, entirely on my own terms. Patricia and I started talking about taking a real vacation together, maybe going to see the fall foliage in New England or taking a cruise to the Caribbean. The idea of traveling for pleasure instead of necessity, of spending money on experiences instead of other people's emergencies, felt revolutionary. "When was the last time you did something purely for fun?" Patricia asked one afternoon as we planned our potential trip. I thought about it for a long moment. I honestly can't remember. Maybe when Olivia was small, and we would go to Coney Island on Sundays. But even then, it was for her, not for me. "Well, it's time to change that," she said with determination. I joined a book club at the library and discovered I loved discussing literature with other people who read for the joy of it. I started volunteering at an animal shelter on weekends, finding deep satisfaction in caring for creatures who appreciated kindness without demanding sacrifices. My apartment, which had felt cramped and depressing for years, became a sanctuary. I painted the walls a warm yellow that reminded me of sunflowers. I bought plants that filled the space with life and color. I hung my own artwork on the walls instead of family photos that only made me sad. Most importantly, I started sleeping through the night again. Without the constant anxiety about family drama, without the guilt about not doing enough or giving enough or being enough, my body finally relaxed into the kind of deep, restorative sleep that heals everything. But perhaps the most significant change was in how I talked about myself, even in my own mind. I stopped referring to myself as just tired, just old, just a burden. I stopped apologizing for taking up space, for having needs, for existing. I started using words like accomplished when people asked about my life. I had raised 2 children as a single mother. I had worked for 50 years to support myself and my family. I had survived financial hardship, emotional abuse, and complete family estrangement, and I was still standing. I had learned new skills at 73, made new friends, created art, built a life worth living. Those weren't small achievements. They were enormous ones, and I was finally ready to acknowledge them. Christmas came and went without the usual anxiety about gifts I couldn't afford and family gatherings I wasn't invited to. Instead, Rosa and I cooked a Mexican-American fusion feast for a dozen neighbors who had become chosen family over the months of my recovery. Patricia brought her famous apple pie, Mrs. Chen from down the hall contributed homemade dumplings, and I made my grandmother's recipe for Christmas cookies that I hadn't baked in years. Sitting around my small table, listening to laughter and conversation in 3 different languages, I realized I had found something I didn't even know I was looking for: community that was based on mutual affection and respect rather than obligation and manipulation. These people liked me for who I was, not for what I could provide. They enjoyed my company without expecting me to solve their problems or finance their mistakes. They brought joy to my life without bringing drama. This was what healthy relationships looked like. This was what I had been missing for so many years while I was focused on trying to fix the unfixable relationship with my daughter. As winter melted into spring again, I found myself looking back on the past year with wonder. How had I changed so much in such a relatively short time? How had I gone from being a victim of financial abuse to being a woman with a successful art career and a rich social life? The answer, I realized, was simple: I had finally started putting my own well-being first instead of last. I had stopped accepting the unacceptable in the name of family loyalty. I had learned the difference between love and manipulation, between healthy relationships and toxic ones. Most importantly, I had discovered that it's never too late to reinvent your life. At 74 years old, I was happier and more fulfilled than I had ever been, even in my youth. But life, as I was learning, is never quite finished teaching you lessons. It was a warm afternoon in May when the letter arrived. Hand-delivered to my apartment by a young man in a business suit who asked me to sign for it. Legal correspondence from a law firm I didn't recognize, addressed to me with my full name and current address. My first thought was that Olivia was suing me for something. Defamation, maybe, for telling Tyler and Emma the truth about the identity theft. Or some kind of restraining order to legally prevent me from contacting my grandchildren. My hands were shaking as I opened the envelope, but what I found inside was something completely unexpected. A formal legal complaint had been filed against Olivia Patterson for identity theft, credit card fraud, and elder financial abuse. But I hadn't filed any complaint. I had never contacted this law firm. The letter explained that someone else had filed the complaint on my behalf, someone who had witnessed the abuse and gathered evidence to support criminal charges. The law firm specialized in elder abuse cases and was representing me pro bono, without charge, because they believed my case was strong enough to result in both criminal conviction and financial restitution. I read the letter 3 times before it fully sank in. Someone had been watching, had been documenting, had been preparing a case against Olivia without my knowledge or involvement. But who? The answer came with a knock on my door an hour later. Tyler stood in the hallway, looking older and more serious than I had ever seen him. "Grandma? Can I come in? I have something to tell you." He sat at my kitchen table, the same place where he and Emma had sat months earlier, but he was different now. There was a steel in his voice that reminded me of myself when I had finally decided to stop enabling Olivia's behavior. "I hired the lawyer," he said without preamble. I stared at him in shock. "Tyler, honey, you're 17 years old. How did you? I'm 18 now. And I've been working after school and saving money. I also talked to Uncle Jeremy, and he helped me pay for it." Jeremy? My conflict-averse son who had consistently refused to take sides in my dispute with Olivia? "He felt guilty about not supporting you," Tyler continued. "He said he knew Mom was wrong but didn't want to get involved. But when I told him everything you had explained to Emma and me, he realized he couldn't stay neutral anymore." I was having trouble processing this information. "Tyler, why would you do this? Olivia is your mother. This could destroy her financially, maybe even send her to jail." He looked at me with eyes that were far too old for his face. "Because what she did to you is wrong. And because if I don't stop her now, she'll do it to Emma next. Or to me. Or to whoever is convenient when she needs money." The clarity in his voice was startling. This young man had figured out something it had taken me 70 years to understand, that enabling someone's bad behavior doesn't help them, it helps them get worse. "I started documenting everything after Emma and I visited you," he explained. "I went through Mom's papers when she was at work. I found all the credit card statements in your name. I found the car loan documents. I even found emails between her and some of her friends where she talked about how easy it was to use your credit because you never checked your credit report." The betrayal was even worse than I had imagined. She hadn't just stolen from me, she had bragged about it to her friends. I also recorded some conversations where she admitted to using your social security number and birthday to set up accounts. I know that's not legal to do without permission, but the lawyer said it might be useful evidence anyway. This child had been braver and more decisive than any of the adults in his life, including me. "Tyler, this is going to cause a lot of problems for your family. Are you sure this is what you want to do?" He was quiet for a moment, choosing his words carefully. "Grandma, I love my mom. But I can't respect someone who steals from their own elderly mother and then lies about it. And I can't watch her destroy our family with her lies and manipulation." He paused, then continued with painful honesty. "Emma and I have been talking about it. We both know Mom has problems. We've known for years that she doesn't tell the truth about money, that she always has some crisis that requires someone else to bail her out. We just never realized she was stealing from you to pay for our stuff." The guilt in his voice broke my heart. "Tyler, this is not your fault. None of it is your fault. But it is kind of our fault, isn't it? All those times she sent us expensive Christmas gifts but said she couldn't afford to visit you in the hospital? All those times we went on family vacations but you were working extra shifts just to pay rent? We should have questioned where the money was coming from." I reached across the table and took his hands in mine, these strong young hands that belonged to someone who was becoming a better person than any of the adults who had raised him. "You were children. It wasn't your job to monitor your mother's financial behavior. That was her responsibility, and she failed at it. The lawyer thinks she might have stolen as much as $30,000 over the past 5 years, Tyler said. Between the identity theft and all the cash you sent that she said was for emergencies but was really for stuff she wanted but couldn't afford. $32,000. My social security for an entire year. Money I had scraped together while eating peanut butter sandwiches and walking to work to save bus fare. What happens now?" I asked. "The lawyer files the criminal complaint with the district attorney. If they decide to prosecute, Mom could face felony charges. Either way, you can sue her civilly to get your money back, plus damages for the harm to your credit and the emotional distress she caused." criminal charges, civil lawsuits. My own daughter facing potential jail time because of a case built by my 18-year-old grandson. It should have felt overwhelming, but instead it felt like justice. There's something else, Tyler said, his voice getting quieter. Emma and I want to testify about what we witnessed. About the emotional abuse, the manipulation, the way she used us as weapons against you. We kept diaries of some of it, especially after we realized what was really going on. I stared at this young man who was willing to testify against his own mother to protect his grandmother and seek justice for what had been done to me. Where had this courage come from? How had he grown into someone so much stronger and more ethical than the adults in his life? Tyler, are you sure about all this? This is going to change everything for your family. Everything was already changed, Grandma. It changed when Mom decided to steal from you and lie about it. We're just making sure there are consequences for that choice. He was right. The family had already been destroyed by Olivia's actions. My grandchildren were just refusing to pretend otherwise. That evening, I called Rosa and Patricia and told them about Tyler's visit, about the lawyer, about the criminal complaint that was being filed without my involvement but on my behalf. How do you feel about it? Rosa asked. Are you okay with Tyler taking this step? I thought about it for a moment, checking in with my emotions the way I had learned to do over the past year. I'm proud of him, I said finally. I'm proud that he has the courage to stand up for what's right, even when it's difficult. I'm proud that he refuses to enable his mother's behavior. And I'm proud that he loves me enough to seek justice for what was done to me. And how do you feel about Olivia potentially facing criminal charges? Patricia asked. That was a harder question. How do you feel when your own child might be going to jail partly because of evidence provided by your grandchild? I feel sad, I admitted. I feel sad that it came to this. I feel sad that she made choices that led to this consequence. I feel sad that she never learned to take responsibility for her actions. I paused, then continued. But I don't feel guilty. For the first time in my life, I don't feel guilty about the consequences my daughter is facing for her own behavior. Those consequences are not my fault or my responsibility. They're hers. That realization felt like the final piece of my own healing. I had spent my entire adult life feeling responsible for everyone else's emotions and consequences. I had sacrificed my own well-being trying to protect other people from the results of their own choices. No more. If Olivia faced criminal charges, that was because she had committed crimes. If she lost relationships, that was because she had abused them. If she faced financial ruin, that was because she had stolen money instead of earning it honestly. None of that was my fault, and none of it was my responsibility to fix. The legal process unfolded slowly over the summer months, but Tyler had been right about the strength of the case. The district attorney's office decided to prosecute, and Olivia was formally charged with identity theft, credit card fraud, and elder financial abuse. The evidence was overwhelming. Bank records, credit reports, recorded conversations, email threads where she had admitted to using my personal information without permission. Her own children willing to testify about the emotional manipulation and financial abuse they had witnessed. Jeremy flew in from Seattle to provide testimony about the family dynamics, finally taking a side in the conflict he had avoided for so long. I knew something wasn't right, he told the prosecutor during his deposition. Mom was always struggling financially, but Olivia seemed to have money for things she shouldn't have been able to afford. When Tyler explained what he had discovered, everything made sense. The civil lawsuit was settled out of court. Olivia's lawyer, faced with the mountain of evidence Tyler had compiled, advised her to agree to full restitution plus damages rather than risk an even larger judgment at trial. The financial settlement was larger than I had expected. Not just the money she had stolen, but compensation for the damage to my credit, the emotional distress, the legal fees, and punitive damages designed to discourage similar behavior in the future. More importantly, the criminal charges carried real consequences. Olivia pled guilty to felony elder financial abuse and was sentenced to 2 years in prison, though she would likely serve only 8 months with good behavior. The woman who had locked me out of my own home, who had stolen my identity, who had emotionally abused me for decades, was finally facing consequences for her actions. And I felt something I hadn't expected to feel: peace. Not joy at her suffering, but peace at finally seeing justice served. Peace at knowing that her behavior had been officially recognized as criminal rather than dismissed as family drama. Peace at knowing that other potential victims would be protected by her conviction. Most of all, peace at knowing that I had been right all along. I wasn't crazy, paranoid, or unreasonably demanding. I was a victim of financial abuse who had finally found the courage to stop participating in my own victimization. Tyler and Emma moved in with Jeremy in Seattle while Olivia served her sentence. The separation was good for all of them. Away from their mother's manipulation and drama, the teenagers flourished in ways that broke my heart to witness. Tyler was accepted to college with a partial scholarship and planned to study business with a focus on ethics and fraud prevention. "I want to help protect other people from what Mom did to you," he told me during one of our regular phone calls. Emma, now 15, had found her voice in ways she never could at home. She was confident, funny, articulate about her feelings and needs. She called me every Sunday, not because she had to, but because she wanted to. "I'm sorry we didn't protect you from Mom," she said during one of our conversations. "We should have realized what she was doing. You were children," I reminded her, the same thing I had told Tyler. "It wasn't your job to protect me from your mother. It was her job to protect you from having to witness financial abuse. I know that now." Uncle Jeremy got us into counseling to help us understand what happened and how to have healthy relationships. I learned that what we saw at home wasn't normal or okay. Counseling. Jeremy was providing his niece and nephew with the professional help they needed to recover from growing up in a dysfunctional household. He was taking responsibility for their well-being in ways their own mother never had. He was also taking responsibility for his own past behavior. "Mom, I owe you an enormous apology," he said during his first visit to Brooklyn since the trial. "I knew Olivia was treating you badly. I knew something wasn't right with the financial stuff. I chose to stay out of it because it was easier for me." We were sitting in my kitchen, the same table where so many difficult conversations had taken place over the past 2 years. But this conversation felt different. Honest. Healing. I told myself I was being neutral, but really I was being a coward. "I didn't want to deal with Olivia's drama, so I let you deal with it alone. I abandoned you when you needed support, and I'm sorry." His apology meant more to me than I could express. For the first time in my adult life, one of my children was taking full responsibility for their actions without making excuses or deflecting blame onto others. "Thank you for saying that," I said simply. "It means everything to me to hear you acknowledge what happened." "I want to do better," he said. "I want to be the kind of son you deserve, not the kind who disappears when things get difficult." And he did do better. Jeremy started calling regularly, not just when there was a crisis or a major holiday. He included me in his family's activities, sending pictures of his children, sharing stories about his work and his wife's career. For the first time in years, I felt like I had a relationship with my son that was based on mutual affection rather than obligation or avoidance. As autumn arrived again, marking nearly 2 years since that October evening when Olivia had locked me out during the kitchen fire, I found myself thinking about how much had changed. The fire. I had never told anyone about that part of the story, about standing outside my own home while smoke poured from the kitchen window, about realizing that my own daughter had chosen to save herself while leaving me to potentially die. But I thought about it often during my recovery, because it had been such a perfect metaphor for our entire relationship. Olivia had always been willing to let me burn as long as she was safe. Now, sitting in my transformed apartment, surrounded by my own artwork and photos of my chosen family, I realized something profound. I had not just survived that fire. I had been reborn from it. The woman who had stood outside that locked door, terrified and betrayed and broken, was gone. In her place was someone stronger, wiser, more self-aware. Someone who knew her own worth and refused to accept less than she deserved. Someone who had learned the difference between love and exploitation, between family loyalty and enabling dysfunction, between forgiveness and allowing yourself to be continually harmed. I picked up my phone and did something I hadn't done in months. I called my old supervisor from the diner where I had worked for so many years. "Margaret, how wonderful to hear from you. How are you doing?" "I'm doing remarkably well, actually. I wanted to thank you for something." "Thank me? For what?" "For always treating me with respect. For recognizing my contributions. For seeing me as a valuable employee rather than just someone to be used and discarded." There was a pause. "Well, you were a valuable employee. You worked harder than anyone and never complained, even when things got difficult. I'm calling because I realize now that the respect you showed me at work was what I should have been expecting from my family at home. You helped me understand what healthy relationships look like, even if I didn't realize it at the time." After we hung up, I sat in my quiet apartment, watching the sun set over Brooklyn through my clean windows, and reflected on the journey that had brought me to this moment. 2 years ago, I had been a victim of financial abuse, trapped in a cycle of enabling and manipulation that had consumed most of my adult life. I had been isolated, depleted, used up. Today, I was a survivor who had found her voice, her strength, and her sense of self-worth. I had a circle of friends who valued me for who I was rather than what I could provide. I had a relationship with my son that was based on mutual respect. I had grandchildren who were learning to have healthy relationships because they had seen the consequences of unhealthy ones. I had art, literature, travel plans, and dreams for the future. I had enough money in the bank to feel secure. I had legal protections in place to prevent future financial abuse. Most importantly, I had learned to put my own well-being first, not out of selfishness, but out of the understanding that I couldn't truly love anyone else until I learned to love and protect myself. The sunset painted my walls golden, and I thought about all the sunsets I had missed over the years because I was too busy worrying about everyone else's storms. No more. Tonight, I was watching my own sunset, in my own home, surrounded by evidence of my own worth and creativity and strength. And it was beautiful. As I sit here now, 6 months after Olivia's release from prison, I want to share what I've learned about second chances and the difference between forgiveness and reconciliation. Olivia has attempted to contact me several times since her release. Letters, phone calls, messages through Tyler and Emma. The tone has evolved from demands to pleas to what might actually be genuine remorse. Her most recent letter, delivered just last week, was different from the others. No excuses. No justifications. No attempts to minimize what she had done or shift responsibility onto others. Mom, I know I have no right to ask for your forgiveness, but I want you to know that I understand now how badly I hurt you. The counseling I received in prison helped me realize that what I did was not helping you or trying to manage your finances. It was theft, manipulation, and abuse. I stole from you. I lied to you. I used your own grandchildren as weapons against you. I destroyed our family through my own selfish choices, and I take full responsibility for that destruction. She went on to describe the therapy she had received, the steps she was taking to rebuild her life without depending on anyone else's money, the amends she wanted to make not just to me but to Tyler and Emma for the dysfunction they had been forced to witness and navigate. I don't expect you to want a relationship with me. I don't expect you to trust me. I don't even expect you to respond to this letter. But I wanted you to know that you were right about everything, and I was wrong. You deserved so much better from me, and I'm sorry I was never able to give it to you. The letter moved me in ways I hadn't expected. For the first time in my life, Olivia was taking complete responsibility for her actions without trying to manipulate me into a response. But taking responsibility and earning trust back are two different things. I showed the letter to Rosa, Patricia, and my therapist. All of them emphasized the same point: genuine change requires time to demonstrate, not just words to express. How do you feel about it? My therapist asked during our session. I feel cautious, I said after thinking about it. I'm glad she's finally taking responsibility. I'm glad she's getting professional help. But I don't feel ready to have a relationship with her, and I may never feel ready. And that's okay, she assured me. Forgiveness doesn't require reconciliation. You can forgive someone for your own peace of mind while still maintaining boundaries to protect yourself from future harm. That distinction had been crucial to my healing. I had forgiven Olivia, not because she deserved it, but because carrying anger and resentment was hurting me more than it was hurting her. But forgiveness didn't mean I had to trust her again or allow her back into my life. Trust, once broken as thoroughly as she had broken it, requires years of consistent, trustworthy behavior to rebuild. And even then, some relationships are too damaged to salvage. I wrote her back, a brief note acknowledging her letter and expressing hope that she would continue in therapy and continue taking responsibility for her actions. But I also made it clear that I wasn't ready for a relationship and might never be. I'm glad you're getting help, Olivia. I hope you continue to grow and change. But I need you to understand that I'm not waiting for you to become someone I can have a relationship with. I built a good life without you, and I'm not willing to risk that life for the possibility that you might have genuinely changed. It was a difficult letter to write, but an honest one. I wasn't slamming the door forever, but I also wasn't keeping it open in a way that would leave me vulnerable to future harm. Tyler and Emma have maintained limited contact with their mother, carefully supervised visits and phone calls designed to allow them to process their own relationships with her while protecting them from manipulation or emotional abuse. They've both told me that seeing how I handled the situation, setting boundaries, seeking justice, refusing to enable dysfunction, taught them lessons about healthy relationships that they're carrying into their own adult lives. You showed us that love doesn't mean accepting abuse, Emma told me recently. You showed us that sometimes the most loving thing you can do is say no to someone's harmful behavior. Tyler added, you taught us that family members don't get to treat you badly just because they're family. Respect and kindness have to go both ways. These young people, now 19 and 16, have become some of my closest friends and strongest supporters. They call regularly, visit when they can, include me in their lives not out of obligation but out of genuine affection. They've also both chosen career paths that reflect the lessons they learned from our family's experience. Tyler is studying business ethics and fraud prevention. Emma has decided to become a social worker specializing in elder abuse prevention. They're turning their painful childhood experiences into motivation to protect other people from what I went through. I couldn't be more proud of the adults they're becoming. As for me, at 75 years old, I'm living a life I never could have imagined 2 years ago. My artwork has been featured in 3 local shows, and I'm working on a series of paintings inspired by my journey from victimization to empowerment. The Community Arts Center where I take classes has asked me to teach a beginner's watercolor workshop for other seniors. Patricia and I finally took that trip to New England last fall, spending a week driving through Vermont and New Hampshire, staying in charming bed and breakfasts, painting landscapes, and laughing until our sides ached. This spring, we're planning a trip to Ireland, something neither of us ever thought we'd be able to afford or have the courage to attempt. I volunteer regularly at the animal shelter and at a legal aid clinic that helps other seniors who are being financially abused by family members. Sharing my story and my resources with people going through similar experiences has given my own survival a deeper meaning. Most importantly, I wake up every morning excited about the day ahead instead of anxious about what crisis might be waiting for me. I make plans based on what brings me joy rather than what's expected of me. I spend money on things that enrich my life rather than things that enable other people's dysfunction. I have learned to love solitude without being lonely, to enjoy my own company as much as I enjoy the company of friends. I have discovered interests and talents I never knew I had because I was too busy managing everyone else's lives to explore my own. Last month, on a warm afternoon in May, I was sitting in my favorite coffee shop reading a novel and working on a crossword puzzle when a young woman at the next table answered a phone call that sounded familiar. "Mom, I can't keep lending you money every month. I have my own bills to pay." "No, I understand you're struggling, but this is the 4th time this year." "Mom, please don't cry. That's not fair." "Fine, I'll transfer the money today, but this has to be the last time." I recognized the exhaustion in her voice, the guilt, the feeling of being trapped between her own well-being and her mother's manipulation. I had been that young woman once, though I was much older when I finally found the courage to break free. As she hung up the phone, I could see the stress and uncertainty in her face. After a moment of internal debate, I approached her table. "Excuse me, I couldn't help but overhear your phone call. I hope you don't mind me saying this, but you sound like someone who might be dealing with financial manipulation from a family member." She looked up at me with surprise and wariness. "I'm sorry, what?" "I'm not trying to intrude. It's just that I spent most of my adult life in a similar situation, and I wish someone had said to me what I'm about to say to you." She gestured to the chair across from her, curiosity overcoming her initial defensiveness. "It's okay to say no to family members who are taking advantage of you financially. It's okay to set boundaries with people you love. And it's okay to protect your own financial security even if it makes other people angry or disappointed." We talked for over an hour. Her name was Sarah, she was 32 years old, and her mother had been manipulating her into providing financial support for nearly a decade. The pattern was exactly the same as what I had experienced with Olivia: emergency requests, emotional manipulation, threats about damaged relationships, guilt about being selfish or unloving. "But she's my mother," Sarah said, echoing the exact words I had used to justify years of financial abuse. "I can't just abandon her when she needs help." "Saying no to unreasonable requests isn't abandoning someone," I told her. "It's protecting yourself and refusing to enable behavior that's harmful to both of you." I shared my story, the condensed version of financial abuse, identity theft, the locked door during the fire, and the long journey to reclaiming my own life. I watched Sarah's face change as she recognized herself in my experience. "How did you find the courage to finally say no?" she asked. I realized that I wasn't actually helping her by constantly bailing her out. I was making it easier for her to avoid taking responsibility for her own financial decisions. And more importantly, I realized that I was teaching her that my well-being didn't matter as long as hers was protected. We exchanged phone numbers, and Sarah has called me several times over the past month to talk through her own process of setting boundaries with her mother. She's facing the same resistance, the same emotional manipulation, the same threats that I faced. But she's also experiencing the same liberation that comes from finally putting your own well-being first. "I never realized how much mental energy I was spending worrying about my mother's financial crises," she told me during our last conversation. "Now that I've stopped trying to solve all her problems, I have space in my mind for my own goals and dreams." Helping Sarah navigate her situation has reminded me why I wanted to tell my story in the first place. Financial abuse by family members is much more common than people realize, and it often goes unrecognized because we're taught that family loyalty means accepting any treatment from relatives. It doesn't. Love without respect isn't really love at all. It's exploitation disguised as affection. Family relationships should enhance your life, not drain it. They should be based on mutual care and consideration, not one-sided sacrifice and service. If someone in your family is consistently taking advantage of your generosity, manipulating you emotionally to get money, or using guilt and threats to control your behavior, you are not obligated to continue accepting that treatment just because you share DNA. You have the right to protect your own financial security, emotional well-being, and mental peace, even if that protection disappoints or angers family members who have grown accustomed to exploiting you. You have the right to say no without justification or apology. You have the right to expect respect, not just give it. And you have the right to build a life around people who value you for who you are, not what you can provide. These rights aren't selfish. They're fundamental to human dignity and healthy relationships. I wasted decades of my life not understanding these truths, accepting abuse because it came wrapped in the language of family love and obligation. Don't make my mistake. Your life is too valuable to spend it serving people who see you only as a resource to be exploited. You deserve better. You deserve relationships that nurture you instead of depleting you. You deserve to wake up excited about your own possibilities instead of anxious about other people's crises. And it's never too late to claim the life you deserve, no matter how long you've been accepting less than your worth. Today, as I finish telling you this story, the sun is setting over Brooklyn through my clean windows, painting my walls the color of possibilities. My latest painting sits drying on the easel, a landscape of rolling hills under an endless sky. My phone shows messages from Tyler about his upcoming graduation, from Emma about her summer job, from Patricia about our Ireland trip. I have a book club meeting tomorrow, a volunteer shift at the animal shelter on Saturday, and a date with Rosa to try a new restaurant we've been wanting to explore. My calendar is full of things that bring me joy rather than things I'm obligated to endure. My bank account contains money that belongs to me rather than money that's already been mentally allocated to someone else's crisis. My home is a sanctuary that reflects my own taste and priorities rather than a way station for other people's emergencies. And my heart is full of love that flows both ways, given freely and received gratefully, no longer poured endlessly into vessels that can never be filled. This is what freedom looks like at 75 years old. This is what it means to finally come home to yourself. Have you ever lived through something similar to what I've shared with you today? Have you found yourself trapped in relationships where love is conditional on your willingness to sacrifice your own well-being for someone else's convenience? I'd love to hear your story in the comments below. And if this video has touched your heart or opened your eyes to possibilities you hadn't considered before, please like it and subscribe to my channel. Every like and subscription helps me reach other people who might need to hear that they deserve better than what they're accepting. Together, we can break the silence around family financial abuse and remind each other that it's never too late to reclaim the life we deserve. Thank you for listening to my story and for being part of my journey toward freedom. The best chapter of your life might still be waiting to be written.